So, we've all heard of computer viruses, right? We've all lived with them, but have you ever stopped to wonder where the very first one actually came from? Today, we're going to trace that whole story from a simple academic idea all the way to a global threat. Let's jump in.
Okay, so the word we use for all this stuff now is malware. And the name's pretty much a dead giveaway, right? It's just a mashup of malicious and software. Its entire reason for being is to cause problems, whether that's messing with your computer, a whole network, or something much, much bigger.
But that brings up a really interesting question. If you go all the way back to the very beginning, what did the first one do? Was its creator actually trying to cause harm? The answer is probably not what you're expecting.
Well, to get to the answer, we have to start with the idea itself. The concept of a program that could copy itself wasn't born in some hacker's basement. It actually started as just a thought experiment from the mathematician John von Neumann way back in 1949. We're talking decades before anyone wrote a single line of malicious code. Fast forward 22 years, and that theory, it becomes reality. In 1971, a programmer named Bob Thomas, who was working on ARPANET, which was basically the granddaddy of the internet, created a program he called Creeper. And it was the first piece of software that could actually move itself from one computer to another over the network.
But here's the thing. Thomas wasn't trying to cause chaos. He was trying to solve a real problem. See, computers back then were super unreliable. They'd crash all the time and you'd lose everything. He was just wondering, hey, what if a program could just, hop over to another machine and keep running without stopping?
So what was the big, scary payload of this first ever computer virus? It would just flash this simple, almost playful message on the screen. That's it. No deleted files, no stolen data. It wasn't malicious at all. In fact, Thomas even coded it to delete the old copy of itself as it moved, just so it wouldn't clog up the network.
You know, when you have a program literally taunting you with "catch me if you can," it's basically an open invitation, isn't it? And it didn't take long for someone to accept that challenge, kicking off the very first game of digital cat and mouse.
And so this creates a totally new dynamic. On one side, you've got Creeper, just bopping around the network, leaving its little message. And on the other, you get Reaper, a program with one and only one job: hunt down Creeper and wipe it out. This right here is the very beginning of the whole virus versus antivirus arms race we're still in today.
And yeah, that's Reaper. Its creator was Ray Tomlinson, who, fun fact, also tinkered with Creeper a bit himself. Reaper is, for all intents and purposes, the world's very first antivirus software. Its entire reason for being was a direct response to Creeper.
Okay, so from here, the snowball starts rolling downhill. We're heading into what you could call the age of mischief, a time when that line between a harmless little experiment and a real problem starts to get really, really blurry.
So in 1974, we meet the Wabbit virus, and unlike Creeper, this one was definitely malicious. The whole idea was that it would just replicate itself over and over and over again, kind of like rabbits, right? It multiplied so fast that it would eat up all the computer's resources, and the whole system would just grind to a halt and crash. We have a name for that today. It's called a fork bomb.
Then just a year later, in '75, we get the very first Trojan. It was called Animal, and on the surface, it was this really fun animal guessing game. But while you were busy playing, a hidden part called Pervade was secretly copying the game into every single folder it could find. Now, the author wrote it very carefully so it wouldn't actually break anything, but man, it spread everywhere.
And then, the viruses start to get a personality. Imagine your computer booting up for the 50th time and you see this poem. And remember, this wasn't on some secret government network anymore. This was L-Cloner, the first virus to really spread in the wild, from person to person on their home computers.
So who is the evil genius behind this? Some shadowy organization? Nope, a 15-year-old kid, a high school student named Richard Skrenta back in 1982. He made it as a prank to mess with his friends. It spread on Apple II floppy disks, and he was such a known prankster that his friends stopped letting him use their disks. So he invented a way to infect them without even touching them. Incredible.
But this whole era of pranks and experiments, it's about to hit a brick wall. We're jumping to 1988. And this is the exact moment malware goes from being an annoying prank to a full-on national security issue. And the culprit was something called the Morris worm. It was created by a university student named Robert Tappan Morris, who claimed he was just trying to highlight security flaws. It ended up infecting around 6,000 computers. Now, I know what you're thinking. 6,000? That's nothing. But you have to remember what year this was.
Because back in 1988, those 6,000 machines were 10% of the entire internet. The worm had a bug that caused it to reinfect machines over and over, creating this massive denial of service attack that brought huge chunks of the early internet to its knees. The party was over. The playful era officially done.
And the consequences were swift and serious. Robert Tappan Morris became the very first person to be convicted of a felony under the U.S. Computer Fraud and Abuse Act. This was it. This was the moment the law finally caught up to the technology, and the consequences for creating malware became very, very real.
So, with actual jail time on the table, malware had to get smarter. It couldn't just be loud and obvious anymore. It had to evolve. And the next big step in that evolution? Learning how to hide. This kicks off a whole new chapter in that arms race against antivirus software.
A perfect example of this is the Cascade virus from the late 80s. What made this one special was that it was the first virus to use encryption, not to scramble your data, but to hide itself from detection. Its actual effect was kind of old school, more of a prank. On certain days of the year, it would just make all the text on your screen literally fall down into a jumbled pile at the bottom.
So, when you step back and look at the whole timeline, it's a wild ride, isn't it? It all started as pure theory in 1949, became a harmless experiment with Creeper and Reaper in 71, turned mischievous with Wobbit and Elk Cloner, and then, damn, it escalated into a full-blown crisis with the Morris worm in 1988.
You know, when you really look at it, the story of malware is kind of our story, isn't it? It tracks our own relationship with technology, from innocent curiosity to playful tinkering, to suddenly realizing the immense power and danger we've created. It makes you wonder, as technology gets even more complex, what will the next chapter of this story look like?